Thanks, James. So stand by, Tortoise Inquiry Room, because I'm going to be coming in a second. I'm not going to pick on Basha immediately because she did a big stint at lunchtime and I know she's got a really long list. I've been trying to pull together some reflections from me from the day, just while the inquiry room is kind of working out between itself who's going to say what in a second. There are two things that I think are the most important phrases that I've heard today. The things to just keep remembering. One is everyone knows who they are, and that was said by Sue, I think, about everyone inside the police knows who the problem police people are, and she was talking about people who are sexual predators. That's the first thing. The second thing she also said was a good thief taker is worth a few abused women, as a way to describe police culture. Now, for me, those two things are the reason why this, why I'm motivated to try to pursue this if possible. And I said at the beginning of the day that I was trying to get my bearings with this story as to whether we're talking about a few bad apples or a systemic problem. I absolutely accept that it's not one culture but many. I think Helen is right about that, Helen King. And I absolutely accept that a number of people throughout the day have said it's not only, we're not only talking about the police, they don't work in isolation, it's a broader societal problem, there's the criminal justice system, there's all sorts of factors. I absolutely accept that. However, in conclusion, I think it is very difficult for us to ignore and they've been coming in thick and fast to me privately on my emails and in the private chat as well, today, as well as in the lead up to this, people who have experienced this and their experiences are consistent, or there are consistencies between them, women experiencing appalling treatment. So this is a persistent, systemic and serious problem, is my view. Whether or not it is true to say that violence against women and girls, otherwise known as male violence, is effectively permitted by the police, effectively legal, because such is the failings of the system to deal with it, that might be a stretch. In some cases, it's possible. And the way we report that, I think there are probably a couple of ways in. One is, we may have to do both of them. One is to analyse the sort of outcomes data and let that tell the story, because in our research, there's like lots and lots and lots of good work, but it's not coherent. It's not sort of all in one place. And I don't just mean police data, I mean data about all the other things. And I think there is a job to do to try and bring that together, across the 43 forces. I'm not necessarily talking about a ranking, but, we identified some data questions out of hidden homicides. The forces who were able to supply data and the forces that weren't, in itself is a data point. Data about different forces' reliance on outcome 15 and 16 in cases of reported domestic abuse, where cases are assigned no further action in some cases. 90% of reports of domestic abuse, this is only reported ones, assigned no further action. What forces aren't able to explain why. Data on the rates of women who leave the force voluntarily. There's lots and lots and lots of data points. Some of these will be indicators. Some of them will be indicators, not all. And I think that there is a job to do to try and look across that by force. So the outcomes data to identify the stories. And then the other way in is to sort of look for the individual stories like Rhoda's that we heard that highlight the key failing elements of the system. So we heard suggestion that some of the vetting departments are really problematic and are overly vet certain types of officers in order to nudge them out, according to certain ideological biases. Which are those? Can we find them? How do we sort of paint that picture is one. We've talked about the 73 cases and we've mentioned the wiki wives. There are a number of sort of particular stories that might shine a light on wider things. So I think those are two ways in. We probably have to do both. Let's go to Dave. What's on your list beyond what we've already talked about? You're on mute, Dave.
Good job, I was on mute there. Yes, I think transparency and accountability in all its forms, that's what I would want to try and go at. I mean, if the Met is going to have an inquiry but not be very open with its data, it was so alarming to hear from the horse's mouth about the probe into the Daniel Morgan case. You feel like it's incumbent upon us to kind of shame them into handing over their data. And so I do think that 73 cases that Louise and I were talking about in the chat is a really pointed way of getting to something, because you set off to find out, what are the cases, who made the decisions, and it will tell its own story about systemic failure. I think that's the main thing. Bash is the keeper of the giant list of everything, and I'm going to defer to her.
Okay, inquiry room, your go. Louise, are you there? I can't see. Hiya.
Yes, maybe you can't see me, I'm tucked away. Well, following on from what Dave said, something that I would really love to do would be to follow a police disciplinary and see how it's conducted, see who runs it, see how the evidence is presented, and report on that. I actually had a quick look at the Met. They've got 2 misconduct hearings happening next week. That's too soon, but it shows that they are actually happening. So it's really interesting. There's this one guy, a former detective inspector, so senior. It's alleged that in December 2019, while off duty at a Christmas party, he touched a junior female constable in a sexual manner, and the touching was not consensual. So he's up for a police disciplinary. That's being held in public because it's a serious matter. I'm sure these are the kinds of things that are rarely more than a couple of lines in the standard.
That's the kind of thing that would be one of the 73.
No, it's not. The 73 are the non-serious, non-potentially criminal, non-gross misconduct ones. So that there are 2 separate categories. The other thing that really struck me is something that Suzanne Jacobs said, and she said, we need to stop parking the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff.
Yeah.
And where that takes you to is it takes you to prevention, and prevention has never been a particularly sexy or compelling thing to look at, but there is really, wouldn't it be an interesting thing to see if we could do a compelling piece of journalism on prevention work? So I know that Suzanne Jacobs at Save Lives, they are piloting, and it's now across 10. Originally when I first heard about it, it was across 3 areas, where they are disrupting domestic abuse perpetrators by digging into their lives, by assigning someone to literally be following them and stopping them doing the behaviours. That's quite interesting. I know someone who is a senior police officer and he heads up a violence reduction unit. Is there a way we could make prevention really interesting? Because just taking through another point, as well as coming down really hard on things that don't go well, it's also true that there are really motivated police officers like Rona who want to stay in the force, and their work, if they're in a situation where everybody's always saying you're so terrible, there's no incentive. Of course there's incentive, but it's constantly denigrating everybody is also not positive. So it's a balance of how we cover these things, I think.
Who else wants to go next in the inquiry room?
Can I, Liz, just say that if it seems to me from what we've heard is that if you're going to be a whistleblower, that is effectively the end of your police career. Whereas if you look at the people who are in Rona's, the end of that was just astonishing to hear what happened to the people that have been proved in the employment tribunal to have been not honest, to have sexist behaviour. They've been promoted in the time period that we're talking about, and nothing seems to happen to them. So I'm not entirely sure how a culture and organisation can change when it's the people who stay in the organisation that are the ones who are causing the problems, and one that brave enough to say something. It's effectively the end of your career. So I don't know if you could go through many of those tribunals and see where the people are that have ended up to see if that's a similar picture. I would love to do that. I fear the results would be quite depressing. There's the kind of cultural vetting point, which is, vetting is checking for criminal convictions, etc. It doesn't cover stuff like the type of private communications that police officers are saying amongst themselves, whether it's WhatsApp groups, whether it's Signal, whether it's whatever, how you can access those, how is it possible, and is it even possible to kind of access those communications? Because I think, that would be very revealing and evaluated, and just in general how the sheer costs, emotional, financial, of fighting. When I was talking to Louise about this earlier, especially when it's the state. Fighting the awesome power of the state is all the resources are stacked against you, all the power is stacked against you, even more so in the police state. So so that's kind of been the most something I've certainly reflected on over the course of the day, because we've heard it in different levels from many of the people that we've spoken to, whether trying to investigate corruption or investigate unacceptable behaviour that they've faced.
Can I jump in, Liz, because I've got to go in a minute? So this is all about culture, and culture is a wonderfully difficult thing to get hold of and get your head around. So I've been looking for moments, ways to try and get a handle on police culture. I think it's probably true. I may be guilty of taking myself as typical, but a lot of journalists will have police who are contact, but not police who are friends. And so it's to that extent, it's a world that is hidden from a lot of us, and so we don't understand it implicitly. Social media seems to be incredibly important because it's where you can get a sense of culture that's unmediated and sort of brutally revealing. So I think something about police Twitter, police closed Facebook groups, police groups on social media is going to be really important to understand the culture that we don't naturally get. There are moments that have occurred to me as probably cultural moments that we could look back at. James mentioned the Cressida Dick sort of ham-fisted response to Sarah Everard. That seems to be a cultural response. It's someone who's not understanding that the public would see this as a cultural moment because she's not thinking about culture enough at the top of the Met. And I also think that David Beck talked about a sort of a cultural response to a set of problems that go back 20 years that you fear would be perhaps not all that different these days. We sort of slid by the Police Federation, but they are significant guardians of a bad culture. They're like a really old-fashioned trade union. Don't be black in the Police Federation, don't be a woman in the Police Federation because they don't care about you. And we haven't really had a proper look at them for a long, long time. So a sort of guardian of bad culture, I think they're worth a look as well.
Who else got thoughts? So if you can, is there anything else that you on Alan or James here? Sorry.
On culture, I kind of worry about the gulf between the group of people who have no trust in the institutions now and the kind of siege mentality that could easily develop within the police. Because if you have, it's an institution that completely, its strength and power depends on its moral authority, and if it has no moral authority within the wider public, but then it has such a strong sense of it within its own culture, that's potentially a breeding ground for some real trouble.
Yeah, and this is that was a conclusion made that point. So, Ellen or Patricia, do you have things you want to?
I mean, a lot of it's already been said. I think one thing that also jumped out at me was this mention of police staff investigators and kind of changing structures of staffing, whether that's cutting corners and what kind of impact that kind of could have. And then, I think the points about the number of complaints that are raised, and we'd looked at some data before the summit on different forces and how many complaints they actually respond to, and there's some like wild divergence there across England, so it would be good to dig into some of that as well.
I'm also interested in the lack of ability to challenge the closed cultures. Closed cultures that have no cross-fertilisation of ideas, where people who are brought in from the outside are clearly hounded out, no matter their expertise and experience. They simply either will not or cannot stand it. How do you change a culture? Because, I mean, if they've been going for 20 years with all their senior officers trying to change the culture and they've not succeeded, I mean, I would be questioning whether they're doing the right thing or not. Are they not doing the right thing because they've become, no matter how well intentioned, they are so embedded in the system that they cannot see what their organisation is or where to go?
Yeah.
I think for me, as well as culture, it's the sort of on structure of the police. I wonder whether there's any local examples. I know that's a huge thing to look at, but I wonder whether there's any local examples of governments that are putting. So I'm thinking specifically about domestic abuse, right? And when we were doing hidden homicide, so much of it was around data sharing and funding for things like Safe Lives and social care services, as well as the police. Because what happens is that the police are so stretched that they can't look at an issue like domestic abuse and really know how to handle it and how to care for people in some cases. So I'm wondering whether we can find any local examples it's similar to what Louise was saying about sort of the positive stories.
But it's also interesting that, you know, somebody had a figure in the chat, which is like the Met Police, 45% of their crime work is domestic abuse. You would expect them to be experts.
Yeah.
That all of the police officers should actually be being trained regularly, refreshed. They should be interested. They should be reading. You know, they should be getting themselves informed. This is their bread and butter. Why is this low status? And why are they not the kind of people who are dealing with this well?
I think also, why is it not a national priority? I mean,
Yes.
one of the points that
Yes.
was also made along with that 45% is the fact that, I mean, the way that the police is funded
Yes.
means that you've got your national priorities and they're dealt a lot more nationally. And as somebody said in one of the earlier sessions, that it's not necessarily one national police force.
The
It's
Home
kind of
Office
the
has said that locally they
Exactly.
can create their own national
so,
priorities.
and that these PCCs who are, you know, elected but not, you know, not many people turn up to them, to their elections, they've got so much power in how each individual force, as well as the chief constable. So essentially it's 2 people or 3 people who are deciding one whole region, and then you get into the whole thing of, I know that at Tortoise we talked about like where was the safest place to live in the UK. I don't think we should even, that shouldn't be a possible question. It shouldn't be, oh well, I'm a woman, I'm born in London, so therefore I'm less likely to get domestically abused or more likely to prosecute somebody because I live in London, whereas if I lived in Yorkshire, you know, yeah, that just baffles me that it's not a national priority.
Councillor, anything you want to add? Liz and Basha, there are 2 sets of things just to throw back at you as you wind it up. One is, I do think the risk for us is that we sort of get into kind of policy wonkery and too far away from stories. So I do think having a kind of real list of, because it does feel as though there were a number of stories that walked in the door, some of them that had been told but we saw in a new light, or some of them frankly that I hadn't heard before. So whether it was David Beck giving you the kind of background on what it was like to pursue someone who was a, you know, custody sergeant and had raped people in their cells, that felt like there was a story there. There was also something that Leroy was talking about, which was around the number of people who had been involved in comments or culture that was quote unquote rapey in the protection department. Would like, okay, they feel like they're those stories that we should think about. I'm sure someone sort of kept a list of those, but trying to make sure that we think, okay, what do we do with it? And then the second thing, Liz, which is sort of one for you and me, really is, you know, we've been talking a bit about how do you do properly member-driven journalism where you bring people in. I think there's some interesting questions for us, which is, what's our responsibility to people who join today and say, okay, look, can you be an ongoing source, contributor, partner in what we get? How do we deal with this format, which is good if you want to speak because you're a public advocate of an issue, versus someone who wants to talk anonymously, and often the best sources, often the best sources are anonymous. How do we deal with that? And then I suppose in that spirit, and this I just sort of knock back to you, which is, what do we do? Do we say, look, we started this today, we're going to work on it through the course of the year and try and commit to doing a number of stories, bring together a number of people. We don't need to resolve that today, but I think it'd be a good one to sort of chew over how we take it forward.
Point there, James. I've been throughout the last 10 days and all through today, I've been contacted by an awful lot of people who are saying, I can't come on screen, I would really like to talk to you. And so I've got, you know, I've done 10, I've got another 10 scheduled for next week, the conversation with those people. So that is most definitely happening. And yes, in those conversations, I have explained to people that I'm very keen to put together a sort of a working group. I don't know what it will be called, as we get clearer, perhaps Basha and I, on the things that we're going to pursue, that we can flesh out our thinking. And a number of the things that we've just discussed in this little wrap up, particularly people want to talk to us about somebody who currently, for example, works for the IOPC, has contacted me. Yes, I feel very, very clear and confident. In the Sense Maker Special Basher on Monday, I know you're going to work on that. I'm happy to sort of provide you with the best way, I think, to explain what that's going to look like. because we will continue to sort of acquire, I think, member contributors and member voices and things like that as we go along. But yes, it's been a very, from the point of view of actively inviting members, new members, potential members, and what have you to contribute, it's been as successful an example as we've done so far, I would say. Basha, do you want to just capture anything we've not already said? Don't feel you have to say things for the sake of it.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I think a lot of what I had written down has definitely already been said. I think I did try and sort of keep to specifics, because as James said, it's quite easy to talk in general terms and to talk about sort of broader policy points. I've tried to think about very specific things that we can do as journalists to sort of pursue this. And I think, reflecting on this day, I come away with two clear thoughts. One is that we just simply don't know enough, which is a basic point, but I think is at the heart of everything, which is that we don't have enough data oversight, whether that's in the form of what happens in independent panels, disciplinaries, vetting, whistleblowing, who supports whistleblowers. There's just and it's beyond FOIs, and it relates to the point about access and the trade-offs that we would make as journalists to get access. That seems to feed into a broader question also about, which I raised in the final session, about the amount of evidence that was released as part of the Sarah Everard case after Wayne Couzens was convicted, that the police were so quick to release images of her being arrested and video footage of him being interviewed. And I wondered whether, what is the motivation there? Is it the sort of veneer of transparency that doesn't actually materially contribute to our understanding of how policing works? And I think it feels like it's part of this greater cultural shift, which is that you have 24 hours in police custody on Channel 4, that there is an idea of access, but it doesn't materially contribute to our understanding of the police, and it also isn't critical. It is mostly just documentary. So that's sort of a broader point. And I think that I also come away thinking that we're guilty of this problem too, because we really only pay attention when things go terribly, terribly wrong. And I think that today has helped me at least understand the architecture of that problem. So it clearly starts with recruitment, and it tracks up through the police force, up to senior leadership, as Leroy Logan said, and between the relationship between sort of disciplinary panel chairs and PCCs, press and access. So I think there's a sort of architectural point that we've also drawn today. But in terms of specifics, I'll just rattle through them and I'll circulate a list. I think, as Kerry said, the Police Federation feels like an obvious investigative question for us. I think we also need to be a lot more deliberative about the senior police officers that we're pursuing beyond Cressida Dick. I think we know everyone's asked legitimate questions about whether she should have resigned after the Sarah Everard debacle, but I think I don't know enough about other senior leaders in the police to know about how we begin to sort of attack that senior culture.
Mentioned to me off the record people that they think we should be looking at, so that's a good place to start.
So that's a very specific thing I think we could do. Obviously, vetting, can we try and find an example of the worst vetting department at a police force and understand what that means actually, and the sort of particularities of vetting. Disciplinaries feels like a really big and obvious target, and I think Louisa's suggestion to follow a specific disciplinary procedure is a very good one. There's those 73 sexual assault allegations, none of which are upheld. I think David Beck is clearly a golden source for us, and if we can make another trip to Whitby to speak to him, I think that would be a very good thing. And similarly, perhaps there's a sort of tale of two cases, that you have Cambridge, a Cambridge custody sergeant 20 years ago, and the diplomatic protection group in Wayne Couzens, and you can try and sort of draw two parallel lines between policing culture there. Police Twitter, that's an obvious thing that we should start having a look at. NDAs as used as part of disciplinary procedures. I think there's a question about tech. Somebody mentioned that Jen Williams at the MEN has been reporting a lot on the disasters of a tech upgrade there. I think that is a big open question that we haven't really scratched the surface of here. And many other things, but I think that's probably more than enough for us to be starting with.
Great. Thank you very much. It's 10 to 4 and it's been a long day. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who has joined us, to the people who've been our invited experts. Huge thank you to my colleague Steph Sproken, who's done much of the heavy lifting in the programming for today, and to Emily Ben as well, who's helped on that side of things. I can't say I've enjoyed it quite. It's not that kind of a day, but it's been incredibly useful for us, and our commitment to you all is that we will not let it lie, we will follow up, and in a more sort of systematic and purposeful and inclusive and open way than perhaps we have done in the past. So this is the beginning, not the culmination of a ton of work. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Friday, and we'll see you on Monday. Thanks so much.